Good evening. I'll make sure it not be loaded. Should be interactive, and I hope you participate, you learn, and I will learn as well from you. What we're going to talk about, the subject, it looks very broad by definition: cyber warfare and national security. Uh, we have how we fight war. We have tanks, we have fighter jets, we have our machine guns, we have our tanks, we have our light tanks. But modern warfare is changing so fast, it is unprecedented. I mean, by any scale, if you see around the world, it's just unprecedented. The scale of change is beyond the thought. I'll give you one example how what we're going to talk about. It will set the perspective on this. Have you heard of that Stuxnet? Stuxnet was a worm that almost destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. It was a worm. It came from the cyber attack from somewhere, which you can guess where it came from, but it almost annihilated, it's almost damaged the whole nuclear program by Iran. This is the case of the cyber warfare. This is the case of cyber attack we are talking about. How important this sort of things can almost damage, ruin, completely destroy what you have built up so far. Another example, an interesting example, if you come across the Sony picture recently, if you heard of the cyber attack, which happened based on the Kim Jong-un. He's a North Korean dictator leader, and there was a movie made called The Interview. So there seemed to be alleged portrayal of him in the negative character, and the virus that came out is from North Korea, and they attacked the Sony ecosystem that almost ruined. It was $1 billion loss to them. So what exactly we're talking about in these perspectives: cyber warfare, cyber attacks. But the interesting aspect is that such technologies, such threats are developing day by day. There is no particular definition as far as I know. With the STEAM panelists here, we try to unravel such a thing. We try to bring it down on the ground, clear the definition, and I'm sure the STEAM panelists will throw light on this. We're starting with Lieutenant General Panwar to throw light. What exactly is cyber warfare and unfolding in today's era? And you come from the armed forces, you're a decorated leader, you also have a technological background. Please.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, Business World, for having me here. It's a great pleasure. Manish just talked about how the nature of warfare is changing, and cyber warfare is one of the elements. So I'll begin by first putting cyber warfare in perspective with the changing character of warfare. Now, many of you would be familiar with this oft-made statement that from the traditional domains of land, sea, and air, where all the things that we talked about today and the industries involvement and Atmanirbharta, etc., we normally tend to focus on the equipment and capabilities required in the traditional three domains of land, sea, and air. But where it is now expanding to, the nature of warfare is in the two new domains of space and cyberspace. Now, when we say cyberspace and 5-dimensional warfare, actually we can add electromagnetic domain and a cognitive domain to these two in addition to this. So when we are talking of expansion of, one is expansion into multiple domains. The other is the aspect of the spectrum of conflict. So as long as the nature of warfare was restricted to the traditional three domains, there were certain specific times when we could say that, okay, nation is at conflict. But with aspects of cyber warfare coming into the picture, especially cyber warfare, the warfare is being fought. It's expanded into from peace to no peace to warfare and back. There are actually very blurred boundaries between peace and war. That's because of specific characteristics of cyber warfare, and that being non-attributability is one. You cannot attribute, so you don't know where the attack is coming from. You can't even say who's attacked. And the other thing is the aspect of it can be launched from anywhere. So I think in one of the previous sessions, I think Rahul mentioned this aspect that you're at the adversary is at your doorstep. So these are two ways in which warfare is changing into multiple ways. The other way, from a technology perspective, one looks at it. Somebody mentioned in the previous panels of the ICT technologies and the Iraq wars and network-centric warfare, etc. So starting from the 80s, 90s, etc., the ICT technologies is what sponsored newer concepts of warfare at that point in time. And there were two concepts which came up. One is net-centric operations, and the other was information operations. Now, net-centric operations is what you can, from a practical perspective, again, there was a mention of, the BMS project and TCS, etc. So your communication systems, networks as the enabler, and your C4 ISR and TAC-C3I systems as the implementation aspect of net centricity. So our industry, now I've been, for those who've been following, the first net-centric systems, and in fact, the communication networking systems, as far as India is concerned, were visualized way back in the 80s. That's when they were inducted in the late 80s. Of course, the first networks were inducted in the 80s itself, late 80s, Plan Aaron, and thereafter ASCON. But the TAC-C3I systems were envisaged in the late 80s. Thereafter, now it is more than 30 years. And we know what has happened to our C4ISR and TAC-3C systems. I'll come back to this aspect later because the focus here is on cyber warfare. We have to analyze as to what happened. Why is it that things which happened in the CV domain, outside similar things were happening, but we could not make it happen within the armed forces? What was the reason for that? We can analyze that. So coming back to ICT technologies, having sponsored the information operations and the and the net-centric operations. Now coming to information operations. Now this is where we are getting closer down to the cyber warfare part. Information operations, again, one can break it up into three main components. One is electronic warfare, cyber warfare, and psychological operations, or I would like to call it cognitive operations. Now, from the industry and technology point of view, R&D point of view, electronic warfare, our industry has been deeply involved. You know about Project Samyukta and all these developments. But again, while we have produced the things, equipment has come on ground, but really speaking, it has not been able to compete with the state of the art which is there in the world. So that's as far as the electronic warfare part is concerned. And cyber warfare we'll talk about. So much about the ICT technologies. Then a number of speakers alluded to artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is what is going to bring in the next revolution, because this led to what is referred to as the ongoing revolution of military affairs. It's also called the systems of system RMA, which was sponsored by the ICT technologies. Now the next RMA which is going to come up is going to be primarily triggered by artificial intelligence and robotics. We also talked of, one of the speakers talked of quantum technologies, all these emerging technologies, hypersonics, quantum, etc., etc. Those are also there, but the primary driving technology is going to be artificial intelligence in conjunction with robotics. So that is going to bring about a different nature of change in warfare, where you move away from the battlefield and autonomous weapon systems come into play. On the one hand, that is one of the major applications. Number of references to autonomous systems, underwater drones, etc., was also made during previous sessions. And the other thing is in decision making. So in decision support systems, how AI is going to play a role. There are two other areas where AI is going to play a role. One is in cyber domain itself. How AI, both as far as defense of cyber domain is concerned, as well as in the offensive cyber domain, AI is going to play a major role. And the last, one can think of the area where AI is going to play a role is in wargaming. So some of the DRDO labs, for example, ESA is doing work in this direction. So AI in wargaming, and by extension in decision making per se, in operational decision making systems also, decision support systems, AI is going to play a role. So this is the way in which the next RMA is going to unfold over the next 8 to 10 years, 15 years, in that time frame. And quantum and all is also going to come up, but in a slightly later time frame. So this is the overall operational perspective in how R&D is going to proceed. So one point which I want to make here right now is that, we've been talking about Atmanirbharta in defense, especially that's what this whole theme is about in today's in deliberations. India so far has not been able to do so well as far as exports, and all efforts of incentives and a lot of progress is being made by, improving procedures, etc. And somebody mentioned that in the very first panel, I think, that our strengths lie in the soft disciplines of which are computer science related essentially. So ICT disciplines, AI, etc., are soft disciplines which are not capital intensive per se. So our strengths lie here. We've so far not been able to exploit it over the last 3 decades in the first RMA. But if we seize the moment now, we should be able to. This is where our strength lies. So we should be able to do a leapfrog and come into the forefront of defense technology if we really go about it in the right manner. And what this right manner is, I'll just say a line before closing here. Maybe you can continue because I don't know how much I must have taken enough time. So the central theme is what I would like to say is that what is my opinion is that the involvement of the armed forces in the R&D process. So we've been looking at how to incentivize, how to remove hurdles, how to remove how to improve the efficiency of procurement. Now, procurement is procurement, but we've really not been focusing on the method of the R&D process per se, and the central role which the armed forces need to play in the R&D process. I can elaborate a little more on that, but maybe for the opening remarks, I'll stop.
Well, wonderful, General Panwar. Of course, he set the background. A definition is required because the line is blurred here. I will, of course, come back to Sujit Samadar. I must tell you, with my writing, I have been learning so much from him. I have been quoting him. It's a privilege to share dice with him, sir. And so again, you'll have to define. But I would like to request you more in terms of security perspective, from the armed forces perspective. As I said, line is blurred. What we understand about the cyber attack is a malicious attack on your system, on your infrastructure. That could be very critical to the country, to the organization you're talking about. We are aware of that. It happens in the organization level, basically. But in the broad perspective, how would you define, the cyber attack and cyber warfare? If you can begin on this, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Manish. And once again, thank you, Business World, for the opportunity of being here to talk about a subject which is very advanced and also very close to our heart. Talking about cyber issues, it's a very vast subject, and it impacts practically all sectors of industry and the economy very clearly. But what is not realized so much is that it also impacts the national security apparatus. And to that extent, my submission here would be more on the lines of what can be done about it, rather than being the actor in the game, but to also look at institutional processes and mechanisms by which the country is better prepared to respond to cyber attacks. So in this concept, there are basically 5 building blocks, and they are not some great original idea of mine. They are from published literature. First and foremost is the intelligence part. Intelligence is a core principle of war. And even in the case of cyber warfare, intelligence remains a very core principle of war. So you need to be prepared. And first is, why do you need it, in the sense, who will use it against you, and for what purpose, and how will it be used? Then, what resources are required to defend against you. So that's the intelligence box, which you need to populate and develop the system architecture, the ruggedization of the institutional framework for national security to firewall our national security apparatus and resources from such cyber attacks. That's the first point on intelligence. The second point about cyber defense is to look at a command and control structure. And that means we should be able to understand how the process of transfer of information, how does the information move up and how the information moves down along the echelons of command, and where those vulnerabilities lie in the command and control system. So, we need to identify that. And this comes through the communication systems that we have, the networks that we have, even simple things like Gmail, etc. These can all be vulnerable. The second part of command and control is, now that we got the process for transfer in place, we also need to look at how do you manage an incident. What would be the protocol for incident management, and how will you, who will have the authority to act on it, and what would be the escalation matrix. At some levels, it might be done at a rudimentary, desk officer level. When something gets stronger, it needs to be escalated up the chain. So that's the second part of the process of cyber defense. The third is, of course, detection and investigation. This, I think, as several speakers have mentioned today during the dose, and even recently, sir has also brought this out. Artificial intelligence has a major role to play on it. And you recall the seminar that SAMDES had done on artificial intelligence for air warriors, where we had really a galaxy of speakers who spoke about artificial intelligence for the Air Force. But many of those applications have, many of those algorithms have applications in the national security structure as well. And I think one of the most important aspects that we have to look at is this whole business of deepfake technology. And you have seen this now being practiced quite liberally in the political world, where you can have politicians give speeches which they never gave. So that happens through deepfake technologies, and that can be put on the social media, and lots of statements can be made originating from a particular leadership to say that you said this, but that incident never happened. These are all deepfake technologies, and particularly this becomes particularly vulnerable for the armed forces when you are getting orders and directions from an authority whose picture you're seeing, who you're seeing for yourself, and you have very little reason to believe that this is not a deep fake. So, to be able to identify deep fake technologies in detection and investigation of malicious activity becomes very important. Coupled with this is threat evaluation and response. Ultimately, this is a standard technology. There are very well-developed algorithms of change detection, anomalies, and all of that, which you have to look at in the overall context of cyber defense, national cyber defense, where you look at, what kind of SIGINT are you getting in, what sort of human are you getting in, what comment are you getting in, what element are you getting in, and does each of these sources of intelligence mesh up to the common operational picture that you get. So there's a systems approach to this whole thing. Finally is, of course, the system architecture. And I think that is, in fact, the second last point is system architecture, which basically looks at testing it, putting it through your beta testing, you put it in a regulatory sandbox and see how it works with a variety of attacks through the cyber business, and what can you do about it. So once that has been validated, then there are new technologies which I hope someday we'll be discussing soon, is on blockchain, which gives you the traceability of that whole conversation or the order or whatever information that you've gotten. So that brings in. So this will all put together, bring in cyber defense. And as General just now mentioned, one of the things about cyber defense is the rapidity with which it grows. Now, if you have a DAP where the average acquisition period is 4 years, then that's not happening. So we need a very agile framework for being prepared for cyber defense, where acquisitions, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, they have to be done as of yesterday. So if you have a system that you now make staff requirements and that is seen by DRDO, some DPU, some 20 other chaps to make some RFI, then after that there'll be some RFP, by which time your entire infrastructure is finished. So we have to have an extremely agile and extremely highly delegated system by which defenses against cyber attacks are procured in a extremely rapid manner, where you're doing it by the minute. So the DAP is certainly inadequate to this task, and many of the provisions of the general financial rules are also inadequate to the task. So I think since these two basic documents of procurement and acquisitions are inadequate to the task, and since the threat is so immense, I strongly urge through this various platform that cyber should be taken up extremely seriously, and we need to figure out ways and means by which this capability is built up in a rapid way, which is outside the box. There has to be tremendous delegation of financial powers, have committees, whatever else you want to do, but it cannot be this 108 weeks process of creating a structure to save us against cyber attacks. So this requires us to be on constant watch. You cannot doze off. There is a constant watch keeping has to be done. Who's going to do this watch keeping on what? So these sort of things will have to be done. And concurrently, we need to look at trends, the predictive algorithms that AI will give us, and all of that has to be worked together to develop what is known as a vulnerability assessment plan. Under the WAP, see what is the cyber defense system that you require, do the procurements for it, bring in the HR resources for it, and get on with it. So my submission here is, at the moment, institutionally, we have some way to go before our country can be appropriately prepared against cyber defense. So these are some remarks. I may be off the line, but these are a couple of things that I have to say. The last thing, of course, is the huge vulnerability that we have to position, navigation, and timing issues. So we have now got the IRNSS in space. 3 of the satellites are in space. 4 more have to go up. So, but PNT is a very, very major concern for us. And we need to find ways and means of ruggedizing our systems from PNT failures. So these are some initial points. And thank you once again for the opportunity of sharing some views on cyber issues. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Samadar, before I come back to this young mind, question to you on the same, I would like to have more clarification, because when we talk about the conventional sense of warfare, the urgency comes when someone gets killed. If there is an attack on your on the armed forces, so there is a sudden urgency. There's required a serious threat on that. Basically, yeah, cyber attacks, it keeps coming on, keeps surfacing, on and off, basically. But since by definition it does not include someone is get killed, you damage infrastructure, you damage a system, so the criticality of this goes a little down. Do you think we should define some way in the conventional sense? And this is total disruptive about that. There is sense of ambiguity, which I'm trying to understand from you in the context of armed forces security context.
Yeah. So actually, cyber is not something which is only directed against the armed forces or against the Ministry of Steel or some Ministry of HRD. It's a national attack, and the repercussions of that can be felt across all the sectors of the economy as well. As we have seen some time ago, and I'm sure General Sir will also recall what happened in Estonia. There's a lovely book called The Kill Chain that has been debated at length on how AI and cyber will look at disruptions in this. But the biggest threat is not that you don't see it. It's not about just sort of destroying the infrastructure, but there is one. If your PNT systems are out, then your air traffic is out, and that can cause a lot of collisions and whatever else. If your PNT is not working, your transportation and communication systems are out, your financial and technical systems are out, your maritime trade is out. So these are the sort of vulnerabilities that come in, which may not see flesh and blood all over the place, but the destruction will be equally severe. So whilst the armed forces role would be to more protect itself from these defense, and I'm sure the government of India is doing a lot of work on this. I'm quite certain with it. We have got a great NSA who's very tech savvy. So I'm sure there's plenty of work happening on this, which we are not privy to. And I don't think as common citizens, we need to know what exactly the government is doing on cyber defense. But my sense is that we don't need to look at cyber in this flesh and blood sort of thing, hundreds of people dying, etc. But, you can still be dead in different ways. If you're out of a job, if your aircraft has crashed, your trains have gone out of system, your metros are not working, because they all work on PNT. So if you are in a GPS or GNSS is denied environment, the impact on various aspects of the economy is completely unpredictable. I have no idea how it will impact us. But it may not be just people being killed, but it can also have collisions which might result in killings. It might have aircrafts which are in the wrong airfield. So many things can happen. So particularly maritime business as well. So we can talk about maritime subsequently when there's a chance.
This is a disruptive technology we're talking about, cyber warfare, and we need a young mind on this. Sahil Arora, you have a interesting. Of course, you have been advising government on this. You're part of Information and Broadcasting Ministry. How do you look at such thing when I say this is disruption? So how do you define? How do you look at the criticality of cyber warfare? From the government perspective, if you'd like to talk about that.
Thank you, Manish, and the team at Business World for giving me this opportunity. And I'm really privileged to be a part of this S-Team panel. So before coming to your question, I would tell a bit about myself. So before joining the government, I started a cybersecurity consulting firm in 2019, along with Lieutenant General Gurmeet Singh, who is now the 8th governor of Uttarakhand. So it was out of curiosity and out of reading a lot of content about cybersecurity in 2019 and 2018. So when I started working on cybersecurity, I found out that there are two types of cybersecurity basically. So one is very hyped around all over the world, which is known as information technology, IT security, which concerns all the privacy part, the information part, the data privacy issues that we face nowadays. So it started in 1990s that governments were thinking about protecting the data of the consumers, protecting the data of the government as well. So they worked really hard on building policies and building concepts about how to protect the information technology part. But when I got into the consulting business, I realized that there were a lot of players in the IT security business. All the big four consulting firms here in India and all around the world are focusing on that part. But General and me researched more and more about what is going on actually and what is affecting the national security part.
Right.
So we discovered that there is another cybersecurity industry, which is a bit underhyped and a bit, you can say, in the shadow of IT security, which is known as operational technology security, OT security, or ICS systems, which is industrial control systems. So when sir was discussing about national security part, how it is affecting, or you were also asking about the effect on the physical perspective, how it can affect the physical life of the citizens of the country. So those industry, ICS industry and critical infrastructure is very critical to that. So it includes all the transportation networks, all the defense establishment, all the shipping industry, and whatever it is, whatever is affecting our life in a major way is a part of the industrial control system industry. So we worked on that part, and we found out that India is lacking quite behind the other nations. India do not have any policy right now for the industrial control systems, or even if the IT perspective when we talk about it. So the major policies are all around the world include GDPR in the Europe. There is CCRA, California Public Policy Act 2011, and there is NIST. There's a organization called NIST which handles the IT security part. But this is, as of now, there's no focus on IT operational technology security. So we got into it and we found out that Israel is a top player in the industry. So we got in touch with a lot of consultants and we found out that they are very much focused on IT security part and the OT security part as well. They have a unit called Unit 800, which comes out of the Israel army, and they focus on building products for OT security. We got in touch with them, companies called Waterfall Security, Clarity. These are out of Israel only. We've done partnerships with them. We have worked on critical infrastructure projects with them. So yeah, OT security is a more major concern, in my personal opinion, that is need to be looked on both from the policy perspective and from the industrial perspective. So we have done projects for oil corporations. We have done projects for metro, rail projects, and power grids. These, when affected with the cyber attack, which focuses on OT security, can largely impact the life of the citizens. So we decided to work on that part. And then we got into the reason why I joined the government. I wanted to understand more about the policy matters, what is going on from the government perspective. So as you have asked, government is trying to build a bill called Personal Data Protection Bill, PDP, which will be focusing on IT security. But we are trying to convey the message to the higher authorities that there should be a bill for the OT security part as well, which is more of a concern for in terms of the national security part.
Good, Sahil. I think it's a great point. You put it across some of the technical aspect, and also very objective analysis. Back to General Panwar. My aim is here to highlight how serious is the crisis, how serious is cyber warfare, and to understand before we talk about the solution aspect, so I would ask you generally, you have been in the thick of the subject, and you have been, of course, the leader, from the armed forces. Could you give us some sort of, say, example how serious it could be if there's a cyber attack? I am sure it's happening off and on somewhere in some part there, but on what amount of damage it can do on the system, on the morale of our forces. It can stagnate the process of modernization. Could you put the criticality of cyber warfare from your perspective, from a leadership perspective within armed forces? You can derive there, and also you have a technological background to do that. If you're talking about the systems which belongs to the armed forces in a general perspective, sir.
So the central question that you asked is how serious is threats from the cyber domain as far as the nation is concerned. We are talking of national security here. So when it goes by examples in the world of state level cyber attacks, you mentioned one, Stuxnet was the first example of that. Estonia was mentioned, and thereafter Georgia was the next, Ukraine was next. The interference in the presidential elections of US is a well-known affair. Also in the French presidential elections, there were interference. And all of these, which I'm talking about, other than Stuxnet, where basically, like I said, attributability has not been proven anywhere, but Stuxnet is known to be, generally understood to be Israel and US affair, which led to Stuxnet. And as far as all these others are concerned, Estonia, Georgia, Ukraine, it's basically Russia's information operations which were in the play. China has been in the background as far as state level conflicts so far are concerned, although some of these like Sony attack and all, I think, no, Sony was not China. So what I'm saying is, if you had asked this question about 10, 15 years back, people would have said, okay, state level national security is not really so much involved.
Yes.
But as things are evolving, now cyberspace has become the very dominant domain of warfare. And organizationally, what has happened? In 2010, the US raised its cyber command. China raised its special strategic support force in 2015 end. Now, these are two major organizational changes which were done. And of course, strategic support force is not to do only with cyber warfare. It has to do with electronic, to do with all the other domains. I'm saying cognitive warfare, electronic warfare, etc. And space also is there as part of strategic support force. So how can it affect? Now, on the receiving side, now we took off how it affects defense. I'll come to defense later. But there are other elements. Now, today in the country, we talk of hacking, so many hacking attacks and lakhs of attacks have happened. Basically, these are individual attacks on various industry elements. When we are talking of national security at a strategic level, what we are really concerned is one aspect is critical infrastructure. Now, you mentioned certain things, they fell into the critical infrastructure. You have the critical infrastructure defined by our government. There are 6 different areas which fall into critical infrastructure: energy, communications, banking, finance, etc. And of course, government organizations. So these are all part of critical infrastructure. Attacking of the critical infrastructure, since we talked of the golden wall of China and penetrating that, we don't have any such wall with us. And so we are all vulnerable. So the border, as far as cyber is concerned, is right at the next to your computer, where the firewalls and all are implemented. And they also can be penetrated. So as far as critical infrastructure is concerned, we had this power outage last year in Mumbai. It was well advertised. And it's been attributed to China, although attributably you can't really prove. So it's the critical infrastructure, one of the most primary elements which have to be protected. Right. And the more important point is, in critical infrastructure, a very large percentage of it is handled by the private sector. So who protects that? Right now, whoever is involved in this critical infrastructure are actually islands on their own who are left to fend for themselves. And their advisory bodies like CERT and NCIPC, who advise, okay, you do this. But really speaking, accountability is with the individual private sector. So we have to find a method of governance where this can be handled at a national level. The reactions and the accountability is also at the national level. There's also the question of strategy. Normally, when we talk in such forums, we talk of cyber security. Cyber security gives a defensive sort of a thing. So you look at what is ingress malware, try to identify through AI, etc., and try to relieve it. But the offensive cyber aspect is there can be no proper defense without an offensive element to it. And in any case, you cannot do a proper defense if you don't know how offensive cyber has to be attacked, because you don't know how to defend unless you know how to attack. So the offensive cyber, the strategy has to be an offensive element, and that offensive element cannot be left to anyone. So there has to be a central agency which has to, be given that charter to carry out offensive. There are certain charters which are existing now. In my own assessment and studying whatever is happening globally, I feel that at least the offensive cyber element, the charter needs to be centrally with the armed forces, because they are the ones who are responsible for the national security. As far as the defensive part is concerned, this is a collaborative element. Everybody has to be involved. How it is handled for critical infrastructure, what roles can be taken on by centrally, just like you have CISF for protecting our critical infrastructure, even if they might belong to the private sector, even as the non-defense one. Similarly, in the cyber domain too, there needs to be a governance architecture, cyber security, cyber strategy or security policy, they call it, strategy they call it, is yet to come out. Prime Minister announced it during the last, Independence Day from the Red Fort. But so how much is it offensive oriented? What organizations? I mentioned the Strategic Support Force and the US. Now we are sitting next to strategic support with China there. So what we have a defense cyber agency which was created in 2019, but I think that is not strong enough to cater for the types of capabilities which are being developed. So we have to develop these, and how the industry can contribute. One is skill development. I mean, in all this, I said it's not capital intensive. So for skill development, industry can contribute quite a lot. And of course, like Mr. Kanodia mentioned in one of the earlier panels, all these the routers and the firewall systems, etc., which you have, they can easily be developed in India. This is not a very high, it is sophisticated, but it's not as sophisticated as the tools that you require for offensive cyber warfare. So that's a different element of specialization. There again, the DRDO of course is involved, and private industry also can play a role in it. But of course, that requires a lot of charters and mandates and things like that. So it's a very sophisticated.
So General Panwar, very interesting point, something called offensive cyber attack, but again, this is a solution part, basically. There's ethics involved here, in the broader connotation. But you said when we talk about the national security, it has a broader connotation. You talked about somebody hacking our system and playing with the election process, which happened in the United States of America. So it comes under the ambit of national security. I would say, for example, the propaganda attack, somebody sitting somewhere there and playing with the minds of your country, influencing through the various medium. Does this come under the concept of cyber warfare? And then when something happens, what we do exactly? Because this happens at a large scale. You don't know where your attackers are there. It could be any remote part of the country. It could be sitting somewhere in the other continent, Africa. But he's playing with your system. He's playing with your system, say in the broader constant election process, or the banking system, say in the connotation of the security. I'll put this question to Samadar on this, and then I'll come back to you for more nuance and understanding on this, sir.
So, continuing what General brought out, there are a couple of things that are definitely tried out from that offensive point of view. One is called spoofing, and we see this increasingly in the Indian Ocean region today, where a large number of ships are spoofed. It's actually in the location, but what the spoofing technology shows it is in the Mediterranean or something else. So those are the sort of things that alarms comes up. So it needs to be checked with its own MMSI indicator. So there are various ways to spoof it. So whilst you can spoof a warship, you can spoof a fishing vessel, you can spoof a ship using the AIS technology, but that is a very important way of creating confusion in the ranks of the other side. The second part is, of course, the introduction of malicious codes. And this becomes particularly vulnerable when we are reliant on other countries for the source code of many of our systems, the algorithms that we develop for our radars or command and control systems, etc., where malicious codes can be inserted, which can work at any given time. One of the, I remember this about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a project for drinking water supply to Mumbai, right? Which was again to be software controlled, etc. So one of the fears was that you could actually insert a malicious code into it, which could, release some bacteria or virus or whatever else into the drinking water supply of Mumbai. And you can imagine the kind of chaos that it can create. So malicious codes, spoofing, deepfakes, these are all standard, both weapons of cyber warfare. And this is something that the armed forces have to develop the technology together with. We have DRDO here today with us, certainly. So this could be something that can be developed as a national effort in creating a capability for spoofing, deepfakes, ability to put in, deal with malicious codes, many other things. I mean, I can get on to it. Network security, for example, RF tapping. Radio frequency tapping is a very important element of cyber defense. The anti-jamming blocking technologies that you need to develop, this is all part of cyber. Then also this whole business of authentication, authorization, and accountability. How do you do this? These are all to be played around on both sides, as on the defensive side as well as on the attack side. And when we do maintenance of these systems, then also there are certain vulnerabilities that creep in if you are not careful, because we know that quite a lot of our chips are still coming in from other countries at the detailed level. I'm not talking about their conceptual level or at the system level. So those can also be embedded with pre-programmed stuff that cannot be detected straight away unless you are able to do it yourself. So there's a big call on Indian industry, and I'm sure with DRDO here, they'll be able to work together in developing these sort of solutions, which are, as General has said, to develop both capabilities to be able to defend as well also to reciprocately attack. So I think these are my limited submissions on this.
Thank you. I think some of the deep dive into the technical aspect, and here we'll fundamentally again discuss about the solution part, basically. So, and again, no, at the beginning of discussion, I led the this particular aspect that India has been leading on information technology. We led, at least we are proud of something we had. We developed a lot of things on our software, in military, in a commercial side. Have we leveraged on that to create against cyber warfare, against cyber attack, against such malicious attack, where we are now? If you talk about taking further from what Sujit Samadar has pointed out in terms of bringing technology, bringing the key expertise into this, if you deep dive into this, General Parmar.
Okay, but before that, I would like to answer one of the earlier observations that you made and clarify on it. You mentioned propaganda. The word you used was propaganda. And so, what happens that if there are certain narratives, propaganda being made through cyberspace, that is also classified in a generic sense, in a loose sense, as cyber warfare. But really speaking, if you look at if you are clear about your terminologies, etc., cyber warfare is what you carry out through your tools of, the code which you develop. So it's a malicious or whatever code you develop to ingress into or disrupt a system or ingress a system. Whereas if you're just using cyberspace by sending messages, that comes under the realm of cognitive operations. So it plays a psychological role for subduing either directly your adversary or the adversary population, etc. So that comes under that realm. Now, any cyber attack, so for example, if there's an attack on a critical infrastructure, suppose, let's say, hostilities are on, or let's say the type of things which are happening by China against Taiwan. So these are all psychological operations going into the air defense zones, etc. Now, suppose through cyber attacks, the critical infrastructure is targeted. Let's say outages are there. Just before actual conflict takes place, there's outage in our electrical grid or metros go down. Look at the amount of morale effect on morale it will be there of the nation per se, and of course on the armed forces also, ultimately the part of the nation. So cyber attacks as a secondary effect can also have psychological impact. So that's the one point which I wanted to bring. But you raised the question on what are we doing and what should we do about it? So I feel that, like I said, there are several aspects of capability development in cyber. The easiest which the industry can handle is what Mr. Konodia was referring to, routers, etc. So that's the easiest type of thing which technology exists and they can handle that. The next level where industry can possibly play a role is, I would say, what I mentioned initially, use of AI in cyber defense, because every industry is affected by at least the cyber defense part, not
Right.
the offense part, the defense part. So the use of AI, I mean, if somebody wants to focus as an industry per se, they can focus in this area of using AI as part of cyber defense. Because I wouldn't like to comment much about how industry can play a role in offensive cyber operations, because it's not the question of ethics. You mentioned ethics. It's not ethics. It's the question of mandate. Who can do it? Because it's a very dicey affair. But really speaking, countries, US, China, UK, and a lot of countries have already built it into their national cyber strategies that they will have offensive cyber capabilities. And not only that, if there's a cyber attack, they can respond through non-cyber means also. So it's already part of it. So really speaking, there's no ethical part of it involved.
Right.
Ethics all sorted out. It's all already an accepted part. And we are actually hesitant. So I'm actually waiting for our national cyber security new one to come up, whether there's an offensive element built in, because unless there's, like I said, unless there's an offensive element of it, you can't defend. But on the capability development, if we have our, let's say, for example, we have our own cyber command, Defense Cyber Agency upgraded to a cyber command, there, just the fact that so many people are working in that area, it's an on-the-job sort of a thing. It's not something which can just be given. So the tools for it can be developed by the industry and the DRDO, the tools for it, what are required. The hardware, of course, is nothing, no special. I feel the specialty of the hardware is not so much as far as the cyber domain is concerned. The skill development, the talent development is what is there. And I mentioned earlier that industry can play a role in creating the right talent pool for inducting into the cyber operations. That's what I would say.
Wonderful, well explained, basically. Now, there's a one situation here when we talk about framing a coherent, policies, and of course we'll come back later on this. But then this question to Sahil: when we talk about the individual and organization, they do their best to protect their system in the overall scheme of things, basically. But in the broader scheme of the government, they have various departments. I think they work in the isolation. They work in the different, in their way. Finance Ministry has their own system. Information broadcasting will have a whole system. But this is a common problem, right? It could. This needs a broader solution. This is a coherent strategy for this. What is your take on this? How are you building up such a threat in a coherent manner? There's a lack of coordination among the government, to address this situation. It happens in a reactionary way. I understand as far as, but keeping the criticality, which General spoke about, Commodore Sujit Samadar spoke about, how do you address this situation? And how do you look at this criticality and also the solution part? So this.
Very critical question, Manish. So as of now, Government of India has two major departments. One is CERT India, and second is NCIAPC. So these two departments, as of now, as you have mentioned, work in a bit of isolation. They work on their own standards. Although they communicate their objectives, what should be done, what should not be done, to all the ministries. They work as a nodal agency. But industry participation is very important. So ministries, when it comes to auditing their own systems or robusting their own, building a robust system, they also involve a lot of corporates to do the task for them. So when we talk about a national level mechanism, so people are working, bigger names are working on that part as well. So for example, there are companies in US and in the Europe who have built mechanisms like cyber scores, cyber ratings. I am also part of one of those companies. We are building, so we are trying to build a mechanism which can be implemented similar to credit ratings. So credit rating was started in '87 in India with CRISIL. So this can be a good solution where a mechanism can be built to monitor this health of a cybersecurity infrastructure of the companies from inside and outside perspective. So right now the companies are paying voluntarily to assess their systems. They pay the companies, they do the assessments, they give out the scores. But when the government intervention would be there, a regulation would be there, then all the companies bifurcated into different sections or maybe sectors can will have to have a mandated cybersecurity policy in the company, and the score should be up to a level which will define the health of the cybersecurity infrastructure within the company. So this I think could be a solution in the government, but it's a long way. The personal data protection bill has been in pipeline for about 4 years now. So building a large scale policy is a bit of a task. The government is working on that, and the industry is also trying hard to come up with newer and bigger solutions for protecting the infrastructure, both the operational technology and IT sector.
Good to hear government is working hard on this. But General Panwar, again, this question is very interesting. You know, we're talking about the solution part, enough of the problem part. When we talk about the cyber attack, and you sort of hit me on the word, it's the offensive. You know, we don't do offensive much. You know, in terms of our national security, we do a lot of defensive. It's a broader acceptance of our policies, basically. But when we have a cyber attack, you know, we cannot fight with the tank and conventional weapons. What we call the cyber weapon. What are these cyber weapons we can counter? You know, and is there a law governing such cyber weapon? You know, if you can talk about such things, because there's a lot of things. I heard debate is going on global level when we research on this subject. So, is there something called cyber weapon, and there's some law around it which you can throw light on?
Firstly, see, there's something called the laws of war. And laws of war are across, it's now an accepted thing that whatever the laws of war are equally applicable in the cyber domain. So to that extent, under whatever conditions you're allowed to attack another nation are governed by those laws of war. And cyber domain is nothing special. So that's why I said that. And when you talk of cyber weapons, when I'm saying that what do you use what is a cyber weapon? It's basically a piece of code. Either it's a piece of code for extracting information. It's all cyber weapons are intrusive. There is no passive cyber weapon as such, unlike electronic warfare. In electronic warfare, you have a receiver, which is passive, which is non-intrusive. It's not emitting anything. But any cyber weapon, it has to first ingress into the adversary network. And whether it sits there to extract information, or whether it is there to disrupt information or corrupt information, or whether it is to create physical effects. So for example, if the power outage goes out, there's a physical effect of a cyber attack. So there's an information attack and there's an attack, like for example, Stuxnet. Now Stuxnet had a physical effect. It targeted the SCADA systems of the centrifuges and made them run faster, and so they got destroyed. So there's a physical effect of a cyber attack through what? Through a piece of code. Ultimately, it is a piece of code. That's what is a cyber weapon. Now, when you say, how do you defend against that? Well, defense is all these other, so many things which were talked about. So various ways of detecting intrusion and how do you clean it? There has to be resilience. There are various concepts of cyber defense. So all those concepts have to be in place. And now, of course, with AI coming in, so AI is coming in, it should be coming in a big way, but I believe as far as, I don't know about globally, but at least within the country, there's not much progress being made so far in use of AI for cyber detection, etc. Anyway, that's my information. I may be wrong. Some people may be working on it. So that's where the defense part has to come in. Incidentally, for cyber defense, there are two types of defense. Again, since you mentioned offense, so I'll also mention offense once again. There are two strategies of cyber defense. One is, it is called deterrence actually. Deterrence by, what you refer to as deterrence by denial or futility, which means that you make your defenses so strong that anybody who's attacking feels it is not worthwhile. So that is deterrence by denial, or deterrence by futility is also a name used for that. The other is deterrence by retaliation. The deterrence by retaliation is that if there's an adversary who has attacked you, you trace him and then you disrupt him. Now somebody mentioned that if you attack that golden wall twice, your own systems will go for a 6. That's the sort of a thing, that a reverse attack will come in such a manner. So you got to develop those capabilities. And that capability, it's partly tools, but it's primarily skill. And that is why skill is the most important thing as far as offensive cyber is concerned.
Thank you. I think, yeah, well defined. But in terms of, there are some no, correlated thing here, especially when you come to the cyber attack. We need, a country like India, which is an emerging nation, we're talking about national security. It has a broader connotation. You need to collaborate. Like I said, the government department is individual. As a country, we need to collaborate. I have seen Sujit Samadar has been engaging with a lot of countries, on in his capacity as a authority on technology, especially on naval technology. Uh, People and the neighboring country do see India in such a dimension. We do see ourselves as a legacy which comes from our being leader in ICT technology. What we can do in terms of collaborating with the nation which look up to from the Indian Navy perspective, we want to be a regional power. We can say somebody who maintains the law of sea and all that concept is there. In terms of cyber warfare, how we can collaborate internationally, how we can bring back such thing that India could lead based on our expertise on technology, based on the legacy we develop in ICT. We can lead, we can garner goodwill, and we can also support. In the definition by itself, India, we say is an emerging nation, So, and of course, we are here, DRDO Secretary. So we welcome, sir. Thank you so much for coming. It all depends on him, by the way, that we're talking about, to Commodore Sujit Samadar on international collaboration, building a coherent strategy where India could lead in the cyber warfare, also guide and help countries. What I mean by neighboring countries, the friendly countries.
Well, this is a pretty tough question. Because in my view, this is going to be guarded technology, in the sense, how each country reacts and designs its own cyber protection and cyber, let's say, capabilities. It should be a closed loop. But by and large, where we can actually collaborate to share experiences. And I think it will be pretty tough to design common systems that will be applicable across the world, because the more this is spread, the less your defenses are. So my sense would be that these are extremely sensitive issues, and it's extremely important that we are fully Atmanirbhar on this cyber thing. We have tremendous capability in our country. We have the DRDO here with us today. So between us, we have enough and more probably to design it. We just need the appropriate structures. I caution to you that cyber is not something that can be done under the provisions of the DAP, which can take 108 weeks for it to be done. These things have to be done like that. So those processes have to be in place, and that is the sort of collaboration that we're looking at. But there's the other sort of collaboration is more sort of passive, in the sense that you join conferences and share experiences and do literature surveys, etc. But the actual coding, the hardware configuration that you create, the network security architecture that you build, the physical security methodologies that you adapt, these are somewhat state secrets. And I think it'll be very difficult to put down best practices that we can copy from somewhere else and implement here. We have to make our own, and that would be my submission in this.
Yes, well, since we have a DRDO secretary, we will be closing this. But before we close this, there's an important question, which is always relevant to the people, that how can government facilitate, this cyber warfare policies in terms of bringing even the private player? I'm talking about a broader connotation. Armed forces also. Could there be national strategy on this to General Panbar?
Yeah, in fact, government has a central role to play in this because of the nature of the discipline which we are talking about. So to start with a strategy, then I'll keep it short because we are at the end of the session. So strategy is the start point, which should be clearly spelled out. In fact, strategy is part of deterrence. So if you have the right strategy, that also acts as deterrence. The right governance architecture is the next thing which has to be put in place. So once you have a governance architecture and charters are, like I indicated, the central role which armed forces need to play as far as the offensive cyber elements are concerned. And of course, there are many others. You have to devote resources, not just for armed forces, they are for critical infrastructure. There would need to be greater resources under the Ministry of Home Affairs. And so those organizations need to be created and resourced. And naturally, I mean, this is a domain, first, the starting point really is to get away from the mindset of kinetic warfare, to be convinced that kinetic warfare is gradually reducing in importance. It is not going away anytime soon, but it is gradually reducing. And things like, cyber warfare are going to play a dominant role in the way nations have their way, so to say, have their strategic effects.
Thank you.
So for that, resources have to go into that.
To Sujit Samadar making this last point, what can government do to bring a coherent strategy again? It also correlates to our armed forces. So you can broadly sum up,
Very broadly to sum up, I think the first step is, I always had this discussion earlier also, but I keep saying this, that ultimately a strategy is a statement of ends, ways and means. So before you get to strategy, there's one step before that, and that is to identify national objectives. What is it that you, and I mentioned that, what you need to, your 4 Ws and 1 H questions must be answered first. Once we know those answers, then as General has said, we have to design a strategy. From that strategy, we develop the policies that will help us implement that strategy. From the policy, we develop the resources that are required to operationalize that policy. And from those resources, we bring in the talent pool, we bring in the infrastructure, and bring in the other resources that we might need, including expertise that may have to be, brought from other academic institutions, etc. So this would be it. You first have an objective, have a strategy to achieve the objective, develop the policies to work on the strategy. From the policy, derive the resources that you need, which is a statement, who's going to do what will MATI do, what will DRDO do, what will DSIT do, or SIV or MEA, or some 10 chas who are going to do what, the role and responsibilities of each of them. I mean, that's the way we have done it at NITI Aayog, on a sort of a process-driven thing. So this would be my submission. You start with an objective, develop the strategy to meet the objective, write out the policies that will get the strategy in place, which is a statement of roles and responsibilities. From the roles and responsibilities, assign the resources, then start creating those resources. Quite a lot of that will be talent pools, HR, ramping up of institutions and infrastructure that we need. So that would be the way forward. And this is quite a huge task. So if I don't know if somebody is listening, maybe we should form a small team, not a huge committee of some 100 secretaries who can spend the next 20 years deciding this. That's the wrong way to do it. So we have to have people who know the subject, right, and make a concise, simple one-pager document for what needs to be done. Anything more than 1 page and more than 4 slides, you're not getting anywhere. So that would be my submission on this.
Thank you so much. So we are learned people. I think I learned so much. I hope you too. We close the session now. We welcome our DRDO chairman.